Hey everyone, welcome back to the stream. This is Josh Justice, aka Coding It Wrong, and as I always say, you'll have to watch and then you can decide for yourself whether you think I'm coding it wrong. We are back again for session number 5 of our live stream series, Building for Mobile and Web with Expo. We've been building an app for iOS, for Android, and for web off of the same code base. It's React Native using a library called React Native Web, and it's all running within the context of Expo to give us a nice high level of abstraction where we're writing JavaScript and we're getting our code running on all these platforms. Let's take a look at what we've got, and then we're going to say what we're working on this week. So here is a development build of our app. It's called Firehose. It's a private link saving and reading list app of mine. I'm rewriting the front end from another front end framework into React Native Web. Here it is running in iOS as an iOS app, React Native app, deployed through Apple Test Flight onto the device. We've got a nice, if I show you, well, that's Expo Go, so that's like the sort of live runtime version of it. But if we go over here, here's a quick time of my device, and if you go in here, you can see we've got a nice icon, app icon for Firehose, and if we open up, the app opens up. So it's a real running iOS app. It's very nice. So we've been making some good progress. We got this nice look and feel put in here where we have this material design approach. We have React navigation to allow us to go between different screens. When we tap on a link, it's going to open up in a browser. And we can go back to our link sharing app from there. So that's where we're at. Let's look at what we've done recently and what we're doing today. Last time we got the production backend API connection working. We finished styling the sign-in screen, and we set up the connection, and we got this unread page displaying links, loading links from the backend and pulling them up. So if you're anything like me, it's driving you crazy as I'm doing this because we're seeing a visual issue. This is a visual issue I did not have when I was working on the code last time, but we do have this time. I should come back to that in a second because I should say what we're working on tonight. Thank you to everybody who's joining in live in the chat. Please feel free to say hello and ask questions. And if you're catching this recording later, please drop comments and let me know your thoughts and your experiences and your questions and what you're working on in development in React, React Native, or React Native Web. So today we're gonna, we got to fix that visual issue, but then we're gonna test our unread page functionality with React Native testing library. Once we do that, we'll see why I've decided to use component state and not a React context for storing data. I want to share about that because that's something I've been learning recently. Then once we've got test coverage, I'm going to set up Dependabot for automatic dependency updates. So we're always going to have the latest dependencies. Very important. We're going to do a quick check on accessibility to screen readers. And then after that, we're going to start working on our next highest priority feature, marking a link as read. And we'll see how far we get. I usually plan more to-dos than we actually get to, just to have a backlog. But let's dive into it. First of all, the visual issue. So scroll bar is not supposed to be inset that far from the side. So that's looking kind of ugly, actually. That's not that great. And this relates to something that I mentioned last time, but I've forgotten the details of it. So let's pull this up. On the login screen, the sign-in screen, we made a screen background component, and we had, is that the right font size? Let's see. Yeah, font size 20, that's great. So yeah, on our screen here, we made a body padding style to give some padding around the outside of our component so things aren't butted right against the edge. And at the time I was like, I don't know why we didn't include this in the screen background. Maybe there's some screens in the app that don't need that padding. Sure enough, that's what's going on here. There's this padding on the right-hand side we don't want, and on the top. When you have a flat list, typically on iOS, it goes right to the side of the container, and if you need any margins, that happens inside of the flat list, so the scroll bar is on the very outside. You can see a bit of an effect of this on the web as well, where we have our scrolling list here, and it's maybe hard to see with the gray, but like the list doesn't go right to the bottom. There's a little bit of a margin there, and that's not typical. Typically, your scroll bar is going to go straight all the way to the top and all the way to the bottom. And the reason this didn't come up last time was my test data in my local backend was only a few links, so there was no scrolling happening. Once I deployed the version to test flight using my real backend, all of a sudden my links list was long, and I saw the visual issue, and it drove me crazy. And in fact, it drove me so crazy that I had to fix it for myself before we came back so that I could do another build locally and see it. So let's switch the app. when I just changed my commit, notice how fast that app reloaded in Expo, and notice that the scroll bar is all the way on the right-hand side. There's a bit of a margin at the top is where the scroll bar shows. I'm not sure if that's a bug within React Native or iOS or that's expected, but you can see that the scrollable list goes right to the top, so there's no margin. The text, like when it's partially scrolled, goes right under the top heading, and the text goes all the way to the bottom as well, which shows up nice on the crazy iPhone 10 Plus screen. So it's looking all good. Let's take a look at the commit that implemented that. This commit here, remove margin from flat list. So all I did was just remove that shared styles body padding off of the screen background. So let's take a look at that component now. This is the links unread screen. And so we just have the screen background. Then we have the center column component that we created so that we're on large screens that get centered. And yeah, notice that the web screen is also reloaded, and the scroll bar, when I have a scroll bar because I have a mouse plugged in, ta-da, goes up right to the top and right to the bottom of the container that it's in. So that center column is in there to put things in there. And then within that, we have the flat list directly, but there's no margins happening in there. And that's what we want it to look like in a scrollable view. So we fixed that visual issue, so I'm not being driven crazy anymore. There's probably other visual improvements we could make on here, but that's good enough for now. So yeah, let's look at what our next task is. Test our unread page functionality with React Native testing library. So before we do that, I want to give a rationale for why we're going with React Native testing library and what I'm trying to accomplish. First of all, there are different types of testing of different granularities. There are different terms for tests: unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests. And for years, I have tried to convince myself that there are good, clear definitions of those words, and it is not the case. It is not true. People use those terms for many different things. You cannot have very high degree of confidence unless you ask them what you mean. So instead, what I'm going to talk about is a sliding scale of how much or how little you're integrating with. In a given test, you could be focusing on a very small bit of code, just one function, or multiple functions or classes or objects interacting together, or more third-party libraries, even integrating with native code, even integrating with separate backend servers. So it's all a sliding scale of how much or how little you're integrating together. And there are a lot of trade-offs in how you do it. When I'm working on apps that are in development and evolution and a lot of features are changing, I like to have a really high degree of test coverage. Because I like to practice evolutionary design where I can change my app around at any time to meet the needs of how we're changing it. Now this app is different with Firehose because it's feature complete. It's been years since I've made any changes or enhancements to the functionality of it, and I feel confident that I want to get it running in mobile, but other than that, I don't really have a whole lot of features that I'm planning to put in. So as I'm rewriting this app in a new framework, I don't feel the need for quite that degree of detailed test coverage because I'm not planning on changing it very much. Now what I am planning on doing is updating dependencies. And you see here I talked about setting up Dependabot for automatic dependency updates. So what I want is a test suite that thoroughly covers the functionality of my app so that if some dependency breaks or has some change, has a breaking change I should say, that I need to make changes with, or if they have a bug, because that's happened, I would like my test to catch it. That way I have confidence that when my tests run, that generally the app is still working. And even if there's features of the app that I don't use quite so often, I won't find out months down the line that they've been broken. So we're shooting for regression coverage. The goals of my test here is really to confirm that nothing has been broken. I see Vishal in the chat says, well said, in my current company, people say sanity test for just a round of happy flow tests. In my previous company, sanity meant end-to-end test. Yes, there's totally different usage of those terms. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, different usages of terms, so it's important to clarify them. Sanity test, smoke test, tire kick session is a term I've heard recently for manual testing, actually. Yeah, all these different terms can be used in many different ways. But yeah, thanks, Vishal. If I'm getting your pronunciation right, please correct me if not. And thanks for chiming in. Looking forward to more of your input throughout the stream here. So I'm really shooting for this regression test coverage of my app, and it relates to the happy flow, the happy path, as Vishal just mentioned. So I'm not necessarily going to cover every single code path at this point. If I find that I'm changing things later, maybe I would. But for this app, I'm covering the main success cases and the main error cases, probably. So what technologies can I use for this? When you're really going for regression testing, realism is a really high value. And so how can we connect as much of our app together as possible? So one technology for mobile apps is called Appium. It's open source test automation to use with native, hybrid, and mobile web apps. So this is very common for iOS and Android apps and for React Native apps. And I've learned about it from quality engineer, test automation engineers that I've worked at. So I've been told by test automation engineers in the past that Appium isn't reliable enough to run on CI and block PR merges. Like you're going to expect, because Appium's really running fully outside the context of your mobile app, it's going to flake out sometime. And it's not Appium's fault. It's just, a notification comes up on the phone, or the phone is a little bit slow. And so Appium is not able to give you 100% certainty. So you're going to get some failures occasionally. And when you're using tests to block CI, like I want to do to cover my feature changes and to cover my Dependabot dependency updates, Appium, they really recommended not to run on CI. Maybe someone listening to this feels differently. I'd love to hear it. If so, I'd love to hear about your experience. But I'm shying away from using Appium for continuous integration. Also, it's a very big ecosystem, and so I haven't prioritized learning it, given that I've heard, it's not really for that CI use case that you're talking about, Josh. Another option for mobile testing, especially in the React Native world, is Wix. Wix is the name of the company. Detox is the name of the library. And their description of their library is very intentional. Whereas Appium is thought of as black box testing. It runs totally outside of your app, and your app is like a black box. I don't know what's inside it. I'm just testing it. Wix is a gray box in the sense of we're running your full application. Your real React Native code and JavaScript code is running on iOS or on Android, but they are getting into the box a little bit. And the Detox documentation gives details about what those benefits add. I'll put links to all of these in the notes. I'll put links to these in the chat for right now for Vishal and if anybody else is watching. So the Detox README describes some of the benefits, but it attempts to increase the reliability by doing things like checking to see if network requests are running and checking to see if animations are running. So Detox can lead to higher reliability of tests. It's really targeted a lot of the times at a developer audience, and it's targeted to be able to run on CI. And so I've reached for and recommended Detox a lot in the past. One of the limitations we have is that Expo apps, like we're running, are not officially supported in Detox. People have gotten them running, but there's some extra effort involved that's not simple out of the box, and I've had challenges getting it working. If I was working on a full-time project in Expo, it could be worth investing in Detox, getting Detox running on Expo and keeping it running. But for a side project, I'm not feeling that it's worth that cost, especially if we just need the tests for regression safety. Another option that's interestingly available for Expo Web and React Native web apps is Cypress. If you're a web developer, you've probably heard of Cypress as an end-to-end testing, user automation testing tool for the web. It's targeted at both quality engineers and developers, and really attempts to, as the marketing says here, really attempts to target today's modern, rich JavaScript applications, React, and other front-end frameworks. So it's intended to handle asynchrony, handle delays, automatically do that so you don't need to write a lot of wait statements in there and stuff like that. And usually Cypress is limited to the web, but because our app is a React Native web app that runs on mobile and on the web, you can test the web aspect of it with Cypress. And this was a realization I came to on my last React Native web app, and I was like, oh, this is great. Like I can go through all my screens. The web is very testable, and so Cypress gave me a high degree of reliability there. It's very easy to run on CI. And now you're not testing through the native iOS and Android code at that point. So that's one part of like full end-to-end testing we miss out on. But I'm using Expo in a fairly basic way. I'm pretty confident that'll work. If something doesn't work and Expo won't boot up, I'm pretty confident I'll catch it in just using the app personally. So although Cypress gave me not quite as much realism of testing as Appium or Wix, I felt like that was good end-to-end approach, and that was really great. And everything was perfect and ideal. I was loving using Cypress on my app running on CI. Then something interesting and weird happened. And a version, I don't remember if it was React Navigation or Cypress that were updated. I think it was Cypress. But I started getting surprising errors on CI on that PR, so I wasn't able to merge it down. So I went and investigated the error, and I wasn't able to find a lot of documentation. But here's what I found. It was related to a page navigation. So when you're navigating, I guess it'll be a little bit hard to see because we only have this one tab, but when you're navigating between different screens with React Navigation and you're running on the web, it's real page changes. So you're taking, I'm on links/unread now. Once we have a read links page, it'll be links/read, and you're actually navigated to these different paths. So there was something about the way React Navigation handled that navigation and the way Cypress was expecting and checking for safety to make sure navigations happened that didn't match. So Cypress started erroring out on it. And navigation worked. Like when I ran the app, I was going to the different pages, but something, we had these two levels of abstraction here where React Navigation was implementing web navigation and Cypress was checking web navigation, and there was a mismatch in what they were expecting, but I didn't have insight into either of those to know what was going on. So if it was a professional app and I had thousands of Cypress tests, I might have been able to figure out the answer. But for a side project app, I decided after some amount of looking that this was not the right problem to be solving. That I didn't, because I was operating through this React Native Web, React Navigation layer, I wasn't getting a lot of benefit from trying to figure out this mismatch with Cypress, and that really I could go with a React Native testing library test instead to step down one layer of realism, and I would still get the full confidence that I needed. So let's talk for a bit about React Native testing library, which I've not remembered to link to. Folks that have worked in React Native for a while, if you've done any testing, you're probably familiar with React Native testing library. It's part of the testing library suite that, although it has separate documentation here, Kent C. Dodds has worked on and kind of created and corralled a community of cats around testing library, and they're really, really excellent testing tools. React Native testing library runs in the context of just JavaScript tests, and it only executes JavaScript. So your native code is not executed as a part of it. It's just your JavaScript and JavaScript libraries. So this, you might, when you're using React Native testing library, you're going to pull up and render a component. So any level of components at a high level or a low level, you can test out with React Native testing library. And so here's what I recommended here. In projects where I'm trying to get really thorough test coverage, I might test at all different levels of really detailed components and really high level components. But for here, what I ended up doing is, let me say it this way. So one of the things you can't test in React Native testing library, let me interrupt myself one more time. So we're thinking about, we want to test our React Native components, and we want to test as much of our code together as possible. So what's the maximum we can test? Well, app is a component. Our app is the top level component that has all of our other components underneath it. And so we could render that and get that to go together and test together. Does that work? For simple apps, that does work. But what doesn't work is when you're pulling in React Navigation. So React Navigation has native components. That's part of what gets you the performance of it and gets you a really smooth experience. But because React Navigation calls into native code, you're going to get an error if you try to write a React Native testing library test that includes React Navigation. Okay, well, so what can we do for realism? Well, one of the things is, React Navigation and the way it works, like we do want to make sure the app boots up and that works. But when it works, it's like that's code that they're handling. They have their own tests for it. I don't really need to retest that in my app. What my app is I have a custom sidebar. We could test the JavaScript for that. A custom header, very trivial, but we could test the JavaScript for that. And then my custom screens. And each of my screens that I write, like the unread screen, mostly, I'm sure there'll be exceptions, but mostly it's JavaScript code underneath there. And I mean, yes, all the React Native components like view and text and stuff like that are stubbed out, but those work okay in tests. And so getting right down to it, the approach to testing that I tried out on my last professional React Native testing project, we called screen tests. And so in a screen test, what you do is you go into your navigation and you see the component that you're passing to React Navigation as a screen, and you say, that's the point that I'm going to start testing. From that screen on down, I'm going to integrate together as much of my code as possible, and we don't test up at the navigation level. Here's the trade-offs that I've found with screen tests like this. I get the maximum confidence that all of my JavaScript code and the linked library JavaScript code works together. And although I don't have the confidence of the navigation level integrating, my manual testing, just running the app, is good enough for me in that regard. And so I found a really good constraint where React Navigation testing library tests are very fast. The API of it is very good because we are interacting with it in terms of, hey, render this component and change some text and press a button and show me what I see. And so there's a lot of reliability there. And we're avoiding the challenges testing with Detox, with Cypress, with Appium. So for regression tests for my app here, doing screen tests with React Native testing library is what I found works really well, and what we're going to try here together on Firehose. So without any more ado, let's dive into those screen tests and write a test for our unread screen. We do have our sign-in screen as well, and I'd like to test that. I don't know if I'm going to do that on the stream or not. We can maybe do it next time. But I do want to move ahead to get the main application functionality of my component, unread screen, tested. Because I've used the same sign-in code on a previous project. I have a pretty high degree of confidence about it. But I want to test unread screen. So let's create a test file. Now that we're finally writing code. I like to use spec.js because I'm old school like that. Ruby developer like that. All right, so, and I do have a cheater because I wanted to make sure that this test approach would work. So I wrote some cheater code here to get started. I'm just checking on my other monitor. So let's get it started and start writing this. We're testing unread screen. And remember what our goal is. We want to test as much of the code together as possible. So we're going to describe unread screen. And if you've written Jest code, and especially if you've written React testing library, or if you've written React native testing library, this is going to be very basic usage of it with some things around request stuffing. So what do we want to do? Well, we need to import this component. Unread screen from unread screen. And so what is it about unread screen that we want to test? And I think what we want to test, well, there's only one thing it does so far, is that it renders links from the backend. So that's what we're going to do. It renders links from the backend. And that test name indicates both A, we're going to see some links, and B, that those links are coming from the backend rather than being hard-coded. I guess we should also probably test it. Links. A link in the browser when clicked. And I think with Jest, I can either just say the name of the test there without contents, or I can, I might need to say something. Test is missing function argument. I think I can say to do, and this can actually serve as a reminder. So let's try this, and let's see. Oh, there's one other thing I want to change as well. I'll show you this first. So yarn test, I have a test command in my app. It just runs Jest. So it's running these. Oh, there's an old app spec file that is broken for reasons partially related to these big picture native code that's logged in. So I'm just going to remove that. Remove old app spec file. Now let's run test. And we'll see what happens. Yep. That's right, it.todo is right. So we can have these tests in here and just indicate them as to do. This way I won't forget that I want to test this scenario as well. But for now, we just want to test this scenario. It renders links from the backend. So, and I will say as a note, I do often like to practice test-driven development, where I write the test first and then I write the code to make the test pass. But in this case, well, first of all, for the stream, I wanted to make sure you saw how I could get the screen working before I wrote the test for it, because I don't know your approach to testing. And also for something like this, like regression testing, it's not too bad. Regression testing of an app that has functionality, it's not too bad to write the test afterwards. So I'm writing the test afterwards. So in that case, what do I want to do? When I'm writing the test afterwards, often what I'll do, first of all, import render from testing library React Native. Because render is what you're going to want to do to render a component. And then I'll just say unread screen. And first of all, what I'll do is just make sure that the test doesn't blow up. Making sure this render doesn't blow up. That's not all. And so I'm going to say here, to do, make an assertion that the links appear. So I want to have that to have a complete test. But let's just see if this renders or if it blows up. Spoiler alert, it's going to blow up. The other thing I want to do is to keep the test running as I make changes. And so the command for that is watch all. So I'm going to change the Jest command to run watch all. And I'm going to commit that. So now we can run yarn test and let's see what they tell us. And we're going to fix one error in the test runs at a time. All right, so we got a failure. Let's see what it is. Cannot read properties of null, reading token. And notice where this is. This is in the use token hook. So why is it calling the use token hook? If you'll recall from before, in our unread screen, we have a bookmark client. That's in the use bookmarks hook we made. And the use bookmarks has uses the use token custom hook. And in use token, we're calling into the token context. So we're pulling data out of that context. But it says that it can't read properties of null. So use context token context is returning null. And if you worked with React context before, the answer probably jumps out at you. Well, maybe not if you haven't done it in a test situation. So when using use token, you need a token provider at a higher level to set that data up that's pulled in down here in the custom hook. In our test, we don't have that. This component is not running within the context of the full app. It's running standalone. So when you're in the test, you often need to set up these contexts in the test themselves. And there's reusable ways to do it with jest or with custom functions. For right now, to do the minimal work to get the test passing, we're going to try to just import one piece at a time and just do the minimal work to get it to pass. So what we need to do is we need to import token provider from data token, and then we say token provider. This is one of the things that can actually be discouraging about writing tests after you've written the code is all that code is there, it works in production, but it blows up in my test and it's not motivating to work to get it working. When you're doing test-driven development, it's one small step at a time so you can keep things working. So let's save and rerun the test now to see how this passes. Xsinker asks, what's the app and web about? Let me answer two things to make sure I cover it. If you check the link that's down at the bottom of the video there, we have a description of the details of the project that we're working on, and that's going to pull up this page for you. So we're building an app. It's a link-saving app called Firehose, and we're building it with the technology Expo and React Native Web. And so we are able to have the same app deploy to the web and to native mobile apps on iOS and on Android with the same code base. So link sharing app. And we are now working in tests. We're getting warnings in the tests, so we'll work through those together. But yeah, we're working on adding automated tests to the app now. Thanks, Xsinker, for joining. And yeah, please ask any other questions or give any other feedback as we go along. All right, so the next thing we're happening here is warning. An update to token provider inside a test was not wrapped in act. This is an extremely common error, at least for me, when it comes to React and React Native testing, and it has to do with asynchrony. Some folks would say, oh yeah, as long as you do X or Y or Z, like it's very easy to get past these. I have often found it easy to get past them. I will say that I still struggle with it sometimes because it's just kind of abstract. But generally, what's happening is you have events with state updates, like the error is saying, that are happening so that even though the test starts up and you're good to go, state changes later and React has detected that and says, hey, like something's changing after your test is done. This is maybe not what you want and it's at least unreliable and you could get non-deterministic results in your tests. So generally, the information here about this is helpful, but generally what you want to do is find out what is the state that's changing and then wait in the app to make sure the test doesn't finish until that state change happens. So in this case, I'm looking over here to see... Yeah. Okay. I have to still wait for getting the text. Is this about... It's in token provider. Oh, and in this case, I feel like this doesn't always happen, but in this case, we are getting a helpful hint here. So, an update to token provider is happening, and the update is set is token loaded. So this is something that's happening in token provider, really down here, where we're saying this effect is running when we mount our component here. It's attempting to get the string, and then it's attempting to set is token loaded. So now we have to say, okay, well, what do we do? Like, what do we need to do in our app? How can we make sure our test waits to see if the token is loaded? And I thought about this because the token, your access token, is not really visible. It's not very easy to look at. And really, honestly, though, when it comes to this screen test, the loading of the token isn't something I want to worry about. I'm going to test out this token hook separately and maybe on another stream. But so I feel like that's actually something that I can isolate in my screen test as well. We're going to test the token logic once and then be good to go. So instead, what I want to do is to, let me see how I handle this over here. What I'd like to be able to do is to make an indication here is, like, I just don't want this asynchronous update to happen at all. Like, please just don't bother loading the token because my test doesn't need it. So I want to be able to do is say token provider skip loading, which is the same as saying skip loading true, but in React, you can just say skip loading. So I want to be able to indicate that in my tests in token provider, I want to skip loading, at least these tests. Some other tests where I'm testing token provider directly, I may want to do the loading, but for this test, I want to skip the loading. I just want token provider to be available. So let's implement skip loading in the token provider to make this work. And this stuff is a little abstract, so I'm glad I worked ahead, so I have some cheater code to look at rather than doing this live on the stream. But I've done this a few different times on professional projects. So in my token provider component here, I'm going to say, okay, we have a skip loading prop. I want to default it to false. Notice I'm not using prop types. I do use those in some professional projects. For personal projects, I like to keep things simpler and just use plain old JavaScript. But so I say, okay, by default, skip loading is false. But if I set skip loading to true, then it'll be true. Cool, what do I do with that? Well, I want to pass that down further into the context, so it's available down here. Then I want to pull skip loading out of the context there. And so then in here, I want to say if the token isn't loaded and not skip loading. So I only want to do this asynchronous operation. I'm getting all my negatives confused. If I say skip loading, I don't want to do this asynchronous operation. So I need skip loading as a dependency on my use effect here. And so now here's what I believe will happen. In our test, when we've said skip loading, I think that'll be true, true, true. It'll say not skip loading will be false. So this will not be run. And we're going to get, then it's just not going to run this. So our token data will be available here in the context, but we won't have this effect running. So I expect that when we save this code, this warning is going to go away, or at least change it to a different warning. Our test reruns. It's really nice with Jest that it reruns so quickly. An update to unread screen inside a test was not wrapped in act. So now it's not token context, it's unread screen itself where there was an update. So let's see if the output will show us where that is exactly. It says unread screen line 39. Okay, that doesn't look likely because that's not the same. So let's look down and see. State update, unread screen 3952. Yeah, so that output is not as helpful, it seems. Notice that our test is passing, so there's no failures happening, but this warning happens, and it's important to look at these and fix them. So this code isn't, this debug output is not as useful, but I have an idea what the state setting is. It's set bookmarks. And in fact, if I want to just test this to see if that's what's setting it, I could just comment out this use effect and see if the warning goes away. And often that's useful when you're debugging these act warnings and pre-existing components is temporarily remove stuff and see if the issue is fixed. Sure enough, when I commented out this sequence, the set state, the warning about the state is taken away. Another thing that I could do is just comment out remove set bookmarks and say, oh yeah, let's still run the call to our bookmark client to hit the server. Let's just not do any state changes afterwards. Save. Test reruns and it still passes. So we've narrowed it down to it's this set bookmarks that causes a problem. So at this point, we do want this setting to happen because what we're trying to test is we want to test that the app renders links from the back end. And so we want to make an assertion that the links appear. Now we could check. So the next thing we want to do, right now our code is really hitting a server. I don't know if it's succeeding or failing. I guess we could console log it to see. It's probably failing in some form. But really what we want to do in my test, I don't want to have my tests run against a real backend. So I want to integrate as much all of my client app as possible, but I want to stub out or mock out the calls to the backend server. And those can happen in multiple different techniques as well. So we are using Axios through our web service calls. So there's a library called Moxios that allows us to mock out Axios calls. I find its API a little bit hard to use. You can also just use Jest module mocks to mock the Axios module. But I think there's a better option as I experimented in this code base. And let me show you what it is. So let's walk through how our calls happen. So in our unread screen here, we go into bookmark client. That comes from use bookmarks. Use bookmarks creates a bookmark client from authenticated HTTP client. And at this point, yes, let's go into authenticated HTTP client. So in here, we're taking in a token, we're setting a header, and then we're creating an Axios client that has all this stuff configured. So if we stubbed out Axios, we would need to stub out the create call. We'd check that these things are passed in and give another object back that had other return values. So it's the mocking gets a little bit complicated in that regard. Instead, what I found is, and I think I probably will test the authenticated HTTP client module itself one time, But from the standpoint of unread screen tests, the maximum readability that I found was from actually stubbing out authenticated HTTP client itself. Because that way, and the fact that we're using my resource client as this third-party call, there's some implementation details inside there as far as what call is made, but I think we're going to be able to write some nice tests that show the HTTP call that's happening. So let me just start with the just module mock, and we're going to let the tests tell us what's going wrong and make one change and improvement at a time. So what I'm going to do is in my test, I'm going to call just.mock and mock out the authenticated HTTP client module. So at that point, this real implementation here is going to be replaced by a mock one. I have to save changes both to my spec and to my components. So let me save them both, and then we'll see how our tests rerun and what comes out of it. All right. Yeah, so here we go. This says the above error occurred, but there's a timing issue there, so we need to scroll down to find the failure. And it says type error, cannot read properties of undefined, reading get. So this is saying in bookmark client.where, get is not defined. Now, I don't have the best way to walk through this if you're working on your own application. You likely won't be using my JSON API client library. You'll be using something differently. So this is easier to see when you're making the HTTP call yourself. Or if you're using some GraphQL client, you can use their mocking or stubbing recommended approach. What I happen to know is happening because I know the Axios library API is when you call axios.create, the object that comes back allows you to call .get on it. And when we stub it out, we're just getting undefined back. That's why cannot read properties of undefined, reading get. So I want to add some mocking in here. And how do we do it? 1 second. I set up some helpers here, but I think we should really do this one step at a time so you can see this getting built up. Yeah, so what I want to do here is after we mock out authenticated HTTP client, I do want to import it again because we want to get that mocked value. So we have authenticated HTTP client, and then here what we're going to do is authenticated HTTP client dot mock return value. And by doing this, we're saying instead of getting undefined back by that, when that's called, we're going to get an empty object back. That's not enough to satisfy us, but it might get us past this next error. So now we're saying, oh, can't find the module data 8 authenticated client. That's right. So I think this is the right path to get there. Yeah, this.api.get is not a function. And I think what that's saying is, so we do have a value here. It's not undefined anymore, but there's no .get on it. So let's define that. Let's say get, and we'll make it a function. We'll just make it an empty function. So we're mocking out that Axios object that was returned, that Axios API object. You know, you can call on an Axios instance, you can call .get. Now on our mocked object, you can call .get as well. Doesn't return anything yet, but we're doing one step at a time. Now it says cannot read properties of undefined, reading then. So and actually let me do it this way. Let's say HTTP. Let's call it HTTP. We're going to put it out here. We'll let it rerun just to make sure we're getting the same results here. Cannot read properties of undefined, reading then. So http.get is being called, and then it's calling .then on the result. I think that might actually be that .then right there, because Axios returns a JavaScript promise, and it expects you to be able to call .then on it. So we can have this return a promise here. Yeah, let's do it. So promise.resolve. And we'll just say, yeah, that's a promise that resolves. So let's see what happens there. Now it succeeds. Our test is not blowing up. Nothing's going wrong. But we want to test more than that. We don't just want to test that the unread screen can be rendered. We're testing, does it render links from the back end? And so we want to actually provide values resolved from here. So let's build this up one step at a time. So I'm going to set up some sample data here. Const bookmark. And I'm going to pull in from the JSON API format that we use, just the basic info needed. I'll I'll show on this page. Let's look at the network tab and see what comes back. So when we load this page and we get bookmarks back, the real response from the server, it has a data key, and then under the data key you have an array. And each object under there is an object. It has an ID with a number. Type bookmarks and links. These are all aspects of the JSON API standard. A lot of these I don't actually use in the app, but I am using attributes to get the title and URL and some other fields. So let's follow that format here. Let's say, okay, for a bookmark, we're going to say ID1, and it's actually a string, attributes, title, test bookmark, and we are going to need the URL. So there is our bookmark. And so then what we're going to say is get, what does it return? It's going to return data book array bookmark. And the two nested datas are kind of confusing. The reason why is because in resolve, we need a promise.resolve. In resolved values from Axios, data is a property that gives you the full data of the body. And then in JSON API, there's a data key in there as well. So with JSON API apps, you're going to have two levels of data nested in there. So let's save this and run it. I imagine it's probably just going to not error out, but show the same thing. Oh, no, there is an act. And the reason for this act, it's now pointing us to where it is in bookmark client where then, so it's actually setting the bookmarks. So this is actually being set on the state, which causes that same warning as before. And now what we can do is do the actual actual wait that we want to do to wait the renders. The links are actually rendered from the backend. This is done with a wait for. This is part of the API of React Native testing library. We do need an async function to do this, and then we say here await, wait for, and then in this function we have the check that we're going to use for the thing that we're waiting for. We need to extract something out of the render here. This is different than the latest version of React testing library. React Native testing library is a little bit different here. We're going to pull out the get by text. And the text we're going to look for is bookmark.attributes.title. So we're saying, hey, the server is sending back this bookmark. Look for that title on the page as text somewhere. And we're going to wait using JavaScript async await and not let the test finish until that actually shows up. And so let's save and see if it works. Our test passes. Now something extraordinarily important with tests is just because it passes doesn't mean it's testing things properly and making sure your app is working. And so you always want to see a test fail. And especially with JavaScript asynchrony, you definitely want to see a test fail because it can be very easy to write a test that you think is making sure things are working, but it'll always pass. So we want to break our functionality to make sure that this errors out if it's not happening. I think the way I'll do this is just by changing the item title to say hard-coded title. So if we are not outputting the title of the bookmark on the screen, I expect this test to fail because the text test bookmark should never appear, and this wait for will time out. So let's save and see if that's the case. Unable to find element with text test bookmark. So that's what we wanted. Now if we put the dynamic title back in, I expect this test to pass. Great, so that's working. So there's one more thing to think about though in this test. It says renders links from the backend, and what we've said is that when get is called on the HTTP object, resolve this data. But there's a little bit more that we'd like to see. We want to say, make sure that the call is actually made by the bookmark client to the right place. Is it made to the right backend? Well, actually, that's not going to come into it, but is the URL correct? So one thing we can assert is checking that the right call is made to the backend is the right data returned back. And that's something we can do by changing this into a function we can make an assertion on. So on this, we can say jest.fn to make a jest function, and we can say mock resolved value. So this is now a mock function that does still resolve and give us the value back. Looks like I've got wrapping, but we can also make assertions on it. So first I'm going to just save this change and make sure that our test still passes because it should implement the same thing. Nope. This API get then. Oh, get Oh, yeah, sorry. I have this jest function wrapped inside an arrow function, but that should not be the case. Jest.function returns a function, so I can put it directly under http.get. That's why it's good to save and check that your test passed after every small step. So now what we can do is, in addition to waiting for the text to appear on the screen, we want to check something else. We want to say expect http.get to have been called. And let's do that to start. Like, make sure that http.get was called. It was. That's good. But it's not more than that. We want to say, I want to check what it's called with. I want to make sure the right arguments are passed to it, because if we're calling google.com instead of my backend on the get call there, we're not going to get the right bookmarks back. So when I'm writing tests after the fact, I like to just put in a dummy value here, dummy, knowing that it's not right, but I'm going to get the test to tell me what the value is that it's called with. I'm going to look at it and think about it, because you want to think about it to make sure the value does look correct, and then I'm going to update my test to make it pass. So I save the test, and there's a warning, but that may not be an issue here. But what happens here? Yeah, expect jest function to have been called with dummy, but actually it was called with this. Well, actually, this is the right value that it's called with. And so let's think about this. http.get from my authenticated HTTP client was called with bookmarks with the filter red equals false. And there's an ampersand there, which isn't necessary, but that's part of what the API creates, so that's fine. So what this is confirming is in the bookmark client, when I pass this authenticated HTTP client to resource client, it's calling get, passing bookmarks to it. And the reason it's not a full URL is we're creating an Axios client here with a base URL. So that's not part of the method call that's passed in here. And this is actually going to create a really expressive test. So if I copy this value in here and say, oh, great, thank you, test. Thank you for telling me what the actual value was. Now I'm expecting that. Now I'm checking that. I save the test again. It runs, it passes, and now I'm confirming in my test, hey, was http.get called with bookmarks filter red equals false, or was it called with something else? So for example, if I were to say widgets, making sure I'm calling the widgets endpoint, my test is going to fail. I do get a warning, which I can ignore, but the test is, it says, oh, your test says you should be calling widgets, but actually you're calling bookmarks. And I say, okay, cool. But actually I do want to be calling bookmarks, so that just confirms that this expectation is ensuring things. When you think about tests, whatever you are integrating together, the author, I forget his name, Ed Yarber, I think, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, wrote a Vue.js testing book, and he talked about the idea of testing the contract. For a bit of code, including a component, including a large component tree, what are the inputs and what are the outputs? And so the inputs here are, well, the input is just mount the component. And then one of the outputs is make sure the call to the backend is going out with the right URL. And then assuming that the right input of return value is coming back out, make sure the right thing is outputted back to the screen. So we're saying when we run unread screen, make sure a call is made to the bookmarks endpoint. And when that resolves to this data, make sure that that text is outputted onto the screen. That's the inputs and the outputs that we're checking together. I'll just state one more time now that we're seeing it. It is correct here that we're not checking, because we're mocking out all of authenticated HTTP client, we're not checking that the URL on the backend that we're connecting to. But that's something that we can test by testing authenticated HTTP client and testing the base URL function separately. But this is a nice expressive test because all those details and authentication tokens don't come into the test here. We just say, is this the right endpoint that we're making the call against? So we have a pretty good, nice test here. Our second test about opening a link in the browser has not yet passed, but I'm going to save this and I'm going to commit these changes, including, first I'm going to commit the changes to token. And actually, let me reload to make sure we have, when we change this token thing here, to make sure we haven't broken production or the running server version. So we're still able to hit the server and we still get authorization bearers, so it's still passing the token, so we haven't broken anything. So we're going to say here, add ability to skip token loading in tests. Oops. Typo. And what we're going to do commit next is test that unread screen renders links from server. So we've got a test there. Now, we don't have a lot of duplication here because there's only one test, but some of these things we're going to need elsewhere. And I'm going to go ahead and pull out some reusable code here because I have a high confidence from having written tests in a lot of different languages and frameworks of what's going to be reusable here. And I think it's going to make our test easier to parse and see so that we can understand what's going on. So I'm going to make a test utils file under source. And what are we going to do? So in this file, let me do it this way first. How can I best explain this? So having HTTP here, having get in here, and having it be mocked, like that's a lot of duplication. All of our tests that are hitting a server are going to be doing something like that, and this mock return value. So I'd like to pull all of this out. And I'd like to put it into a function mock HTTP. All that our test needs to think about is, oh, we're mocking out the HTTP. Cool. And there I'm going to put this. I'm going to actually return HTTP out of it. We do need, well, I'll come back to that in a second. To get authenticated client, we do need to import it from here so that we can mock it out. So that's going to come back. And we don't want to do the mock resolve value. All we want to do at this point is just give us a jest function here that we're later then going to be able to mock a resolved value on it. To get that jest warning to be removed, we can put an ESLint disable. There's probably a more elegant way to do this, but I'll just do this for now to get that warning out of the way. And now in here, we're going to import mock HTTP from test utils, I think is the right path. We're going to say const HTTP equals mock HTTP, and then we're going to say http.get, and then call mock resolve value there. So that has simplified those lines. I'm going to run the test to make sure it still succeeds. I've simplified those lines, including removing the need to call authenticated HTTP client there. And really what we say is, in our test, we want to mock out HTTP, and here's the value that should come back from somewhere. So we save it, and we're done. Now when it comes to these multiple nested datas, I can often get confused and add too many of them or too few of them. So I'd like to remove that as well. That also clutters up the screen here. So let's make another, let's copy and paste it, make another test util. We're going to say export function JSON API response. And we're going to say records. So this is when we're just returning a response, it's JSON API format, and we have certain records that are included. This is how it's going to look, and it's just going to be data records. It's going to allow us to return a JSON API response. I'm going to put that in here, JSON API response, and we're saying JSON API response, and the response is the array including only bookmark. So now what we're saying here is this. Hey, when http.get is called, here's what you should resolve to. A JSON API response, and in the records that are in that response is an array containing only bookmark. We save, and it's still passing. So that's good. And let me just see that this breaks. I'm just going to remove those bookmarks from there and make sure that our tests are still succeeding correctly. Yeah, it says unable to find the element with text test bookmark. So if I don't pass that in here, it's not correctly stubbed out. So we're good to go. Well, I didn't let it rerun after I put it back in. So let's see it passing. It's passing. All right, so we've extracted these test utils. So that was all based on pre-work that I did. When it comes to this section here, testing that it opens a link in the browser when clicked, I haven't actually done anything on that in advance. So we're going to do that live, and we're going to see how it goes. It might be trivial. It might be very complicated. You never know with React Native testing because it's challenging because of these native code that's happening here. But let's see what it looks like to open a link in the browser when clicked, because I really wanted to make sure the full functionality we have on this screen is covered. And note, I'm not testing every detail of the styling. I'm not checking that it's a certain component that's rendered. I'm just checking, is the title on the screen, and are we taken to the right link when we click? So how do we do that? Let's copy and paste this. We might remove this duplication later, but we're still going to mock things out. And then we're going to render out on the screen, get by text back. And now let's try. We do need to wait for it to show up on the screen. And then after that, we can say get by text. And I need to look up the library to see here. Fire event.press. So let's import that. We're going to say fire event.press. So we're going to press on the element that has that title. And then to do make sure we are navigated to the appropriate link. I'm not totally sure how that's going to work. It depends on how the React native code works. But let's just see what happens in our test. And we can say .only, so it's only running the one test we're working on here. If you're just joining in on the stream, we are building an app that's a link saving application. Right now we've got our first screen going where we've got a screen showing the links, and we're writing automated tests for it now. All right, opens the link in the browser when clicked. So that succeeded. It didn't error out or anything like that. So what can we do to identify that that link happened? Well, let's see how we do the navigation. In unread screen, we have open bookmark. Open bookmark says on platform OS web, do this, and otherwise do linking.openURL. And linking is right here in Expo linking. So what I'm thinking is what we can do, linking.openURL in the native code goes into native code and it launches Safari or your preferred browser or your Android Chrome, and it opens things up. But when it comes to just testing our JavaScript code and JavaScript library code together, I think what we can do is use just module mocks to mock out Expo linking and then just check that OpenURL was called with the correct URL. So let's see if we can do that. So in here, we're going to say just.mock Expo linking, import star as linking from Expo linking, and then what I'd like to be able to do is something like expect linking.openURL to have been called with, and now I do actually know the value. It's bookmark.attributes.url. So make sure that when you click it, this call happens. I'm not actually sure what platform.os is in a jest test though, so let me log that out. Because that understanding which branch is being hit there could help avoid confusion. So let's save this. Actually, that's gonna come down here. I guess it saved that as well. That's interesting. All right. Receive value must be a mock or spy function. OS is iOS. So yeah, apparently running in tests, OS returns iOS in the platform. So that's going to hit that branch, but it's saying that we didn't successfully, must be a mock or spy function. Received has value undefined. Linking.openURL. Interesting. Some of the jest module mocking, I'm not always positive what is the right way to make it work. It may be, like with this import star, maybe it's different here to say openURL, and we say expect openURL to have been called. There's details here that if I paid more attention to the jest internals, it could help. Received has value undefined. So mocking out Expo linking is not working well so far. But maybe what I can do is, let me do this, console.log open URL. Instead of just looking at the assertions, let's just log out the value that was actually mocked out. This is some of the challengingness or messiness of React Native tests, where you have to mock out native code, and it gets kind of challenging. So let's just, okay, so open URL is given us undefined. What if we say linking from Expo linking? Let's see what gets logged out there. Linking is undefined. So this is interesting. That just seems to work differently to me than this. Let me try Googling this. Mocking Expo linking. Yeah, that's right. So this is another approach to the jest mock API, where we can say up here, we can say what it is that we want it to return. So we can say when Expo linking is called, return open URL with it, which is a just.function. Yeah, and let's just try linking like this, and we'll see what happens here. This is saying return this value when Expo linking is imported. Oh, and now console logging out. Notice it says linking has open URL. And so it says linking open URL is not a function. Oh, I did happen to notice it's the capitalization here. So it's open URL with all caps. Open URL. We save. And our test actually passed. So this is exciting. So let's see what happened here. We're saying Expo linking, imported as linking. I wonder if it is strange to me that it's different. We, instead of star as linking, we do star as linking. Let's see if star as linking with the import works the same way. Because the more our tests resemble our production code, the better off we'll be. And ES imports are something that I don't have total confidence in the edge cases as well, but it seems like importing star as linking here, just like here, works. And what we're saying is, hey, mock out Expo linking, and instead of the real implementation, return this object that has a function for open URL. And down here where we say expect open URL to have been called with the right URL. So it's passing. So now we need to see it breaking to be sure. I'm going to comment out linking.openURL to make sure that the test fails if it's not called. It does. It says expected to have been called with codingitwrong.com, but the number of calls was 0. Just to be totally confident, let's say dummy. Change the code to say call open URL with dummy. Let's make sure the test fails because we're calling it with the wrong argument. Yes, expected codingitwrong.com received dummy. So if we change it back to the URL, we're now successfully calling out. Notice as well that the test isn't covering the Platform OS web branch. For the moment, that is good enough for me. Maybe there's a way to handle that separately. You could probably stub out platform, but this functionality gives me enough confidence for the moment. So let's remove the only and make sure that the tests both pass when they're both being run. They do. Cool, okay. All right, this is great shape. So we have one test that makes sure we render links from the backend, and another test that makes sure we open a link in the browser when clicked. So I think we've fully covered the basic, straightforward functionality of this screen. Notice we haven't actually implemented any error handling for if the bookmark client doesn't load. So if we add that in the future, I'll be sure to add a test around that. But we have an addition here. So we'll say test clicking a link works. And that went smoother than I expected, smoother than I feared, so that's exciting. So we're now at the point where we have the functionality of the unread screen covered by test, and we're in good shape. Let's look at what's next on our list. After we tested our unread page functionality, we're going to talk about why to prefer component state over React context for storing data. So you may notice in the screen here that I have a list of bookmarks with use state directly under the screen. And I have this client that retrieves the data from the server, but then I just set them directly in that screen. And depending on how you like to design React applications, you may say, wow, I really wish there was some central store where that could go. I'd like to put that in a React context, kind of analogous to Redux, like store it in a central place. We don't need multiple lists of bookmarks all throughout the application. Maybe it's needed and helpful to have it there from the start. So this is an approach that I've had over time over the years, as I've gotten into front end and native development and thought through approaches to data storage. And I recently wrote a blog post, here it is, I'll post it in the chat and I'll post it in the show notes, called There and Back Again, The Journey for a Default Front-End Data Layer. And when it comes to building apps like the one we're building now, where it's just a very simple, straightforward data display and interaction app, I really wanted a way in my head to say, what's the default way I should set up that data layer? And to think through different options and possibilities. And I went through different options: Firebase, Orbit, CouchDB, PouchDB, an approach called Identity Map inspired by Ember Data from Ember.js, and then a dumb global store where it's just data, but it's at least stored in a React context. But I had a conversation with a coworker, Taylor Martin, where he helped me see the value of local state. One of the reasons is by just putting the state locally in unread screen instead of up globally in the app, we're just avoiding complexity. And this way, every time you go to the screen, you can reload the data, and that's going to be more likely to be what users expect anyways. And just, avoiding complexity when it's not needed. The other thing about this, though, the other reason to avoid context when you can't help it is shown by our tests. So remember, I'm going to run the test again. Now remember what happened before we had a token provider in place. We had unread screen by itself. We want to just test unread screen. But when we ran these tests, we got an error. And the error was, hey, I'm trying to use token, but can't read properties of null. And if you're newer to testing, you might look at this and say, oh, why are my tests breaking? Like, I just want to test unread screen. Why is nothing working? It works in the production app. And the reason is you have a dependency in your code. There's something in your code that depends on something else in the broader context being the case. In this case, having a provider that makes that context available. And if you store all your data in global context, your tests are going to require more and more context to be set up in order to set up your data. And that's not a problem with the testing approach. It's the test exposing the fact that your data has a lot of coupling. Now, sometimes you do need that global context. For example, having this token available throughout our app, putting into context, I believe is the right way to do it. So I'm worth it. I am willing to take on the cost of having a token provider here. And as we build up more and more tests, maybe I put that in some centralized reusable place. But I'd really like to avoid having a context for bookmarks and having a context for read bookmarks and having a context for tags. And maybe I have 10 or 15 or 100 data models in my app. I don't want those in global contexts. If I can get away with just having them be local state in a component, it makes my test simpler because that's one global dependency that I don't have. So there's a real benefit to storing your data locally in a component when you can get away with it. And I'd recommend checking out this post for more thoughts that I put into this and coming from experts in React like Taylor that have helped me out. All right, so next, what I want to do is set up Dependabot for automatic dependency updates. Now that we have these tests in place, I want to get the advantage of it by having, and there's a number of other tools like this, but Dependabot, which is now owned by GitHub, running and checking for updates to all my dependencies. I don't want to let all these different dependencies fall out of date. I want to get them updated, and I now have tests that get me coverage there. But to get those tests running there, first I need to get our tests running on GitHub. So I'll go ahead and push the code up to GitHub. But then after this, what I want to do is go and copy my GitHub Actions configuration. So Circle CI is another good CI service. If you have a CI service that you like, that's all good and go for it. But make sure you can get your React Native code running on there. So this is a GitHub folder. And if you check the GitHub Actions documentation, you'd see how to do this. New folder. Workflows. Instead of checking the documentation, I'm going to copy and paste. New file, test.yml. So I'm going to paste this in, and then we're going to take a look at it and see what and all is needed. So, on push, which is to say whenever code is pushed up to the server, we're going to run this test job on Ubuntu. I found that locking a specific version is good so that when Ubuntu updates in Docker images, it doesn't break things. We want to check out our code. We want to cache our yarn. If you've done GitHub Actions, you've seen things like this before. Cache it. Install dependencies. Frozen lock file, important to not get things out of whack. We have unit tests that run after that, and then ESLint after that. Do I want ESLint to fail first? I don't know if it matters. Previously, I had, in my other project, I do still have some Cypress tests running, but I want to remove those for now. That's going to have the effect of speeding up our test suite run significantly as well. So we're just running our tests and running ESLint. And I'm passing watch all false so that it doesn't hang indefinitely, but that CI actually finishes. So I would not be surprised if I've gotten something wrong, but I'd say add GitHub action for test and lint. We're going to push this up, and then we're going to open our project. And let's see this test run. So here's Firehose Expo. This is the project that we're working in. And under the Actions tab, hopefully we'll see an action getting started. Add GitHub action for test and lint. It's getting started as we drill in. It's running Actions cache to pull it down. So I'm just going to blab about dependencies while this is going. Actually, I can go ahead and get the file set up to configure the dependencies. So there's different ways to set up Dependabot as well, but we can say dependabot.yml. I think there's an even easier way to do this because I think this auto-generated for me. Yeah, so this, I don't need this here, but this is a config file for Dependabot. Dependabot, we say we have npm code in here. It's in the root. And how often do we want it to run? I'm going to run daily for now. I may change that to weekly, but this way, over this next week, as Dependabot pops in with dependency updates, I'll be able to see it and report back in next week's stream how it went. So I'm going to save this, not commit it yet, but let's just see what's happening on the server. So on the server, our dependencies installed. Our dependencies ran. We saw the unread screen where they passed there. If I wanted to, I could break the code and push it up to the server to make sure it breaks there, but I feel pretty confident about this. And our ESLint runs as well. We have these post actions, and we saw that it passed. So that's really good. Now let's try adding Dependabot. Add Dependabot config. We're going to push this up to the server. And now what I'm hoping will happen is we're going to get a pull request created by Dependabot whenever there is a dependency that changes. And probably they've changed in the several weeks, the month, since we've started this series. So if I go under Insights to Dependency Graph to Dependabot, that's where it is now, it says that it sees it's tracking dependencies in package.json, and it's checking now to see if there are any of those. So we're going to wait on that. As I move forward with future development here, I'm sure in the next 49 minutes before the end of the stream, it's probably going to pop in with some pull requests for dependencies. So I'm just going to leave this page up, and we're going to come back to it a bit later. All right, what do we have? So we have tentatively set up Dependabot for our automatic dependency updates. We're going to check on those a bit later to make sure they come in okay. Now I want to show, and this will be good for just a brief demonstration, to show how accessible our app is to screen readers, because accessibility is important. Accessibility can cover many things, including text size and things like that. One specific thing about accessibility that I care about is screen reader support. And I care about this because I've worked on professional projects where we've prioritized screen reader support. And I think really it's ideal to do that on all your projects. But also because I have a benefit from it as well. So my vision is not impaired. I can see close to 20/20 vision, but I do experience some wrist strain. And so there's a feature of iOS called voice control that allows you to control the phone, and there's one in macOS as well, using your voice. So I'm going to show it to you here by turning on voice control here. This little icon here says that it's listening for voice control. Now I'm going to open up our app, the deployed version of the app. So if I say show names, it's popped up on here and said show names, and now these little overlays on here that show different things that can have different commands. Unfortunately, it looks like the sidebar commands are showing up here as well. But one thing that's showing up is that this icon on here says menu. So if I say tap menu, and the menu pops out. And if I say tap unread, I think it's not catching it because iOS is smart enough to note that I'm saying in the middle of a sentence. So let's try this again. I'm going to show one more thing. Tap menu, swipe left. So you can also do swipes in the middle of the screen. Show names. So you can see that the name of the link item is very long, and it's partially because the text of a link could be very long. So that would be hard to click on. So instead, if we say show numbers, different numbers are showing. That number 4 is at kind of a weird space, but let me just try it. Tap 4. And that is tapped on the link there and opened up a web link. So this is good stuff. And I want to show you why that happened, because you can wonder, that the icon is a hamburger menu icon. Why doesn't it just say hamburger? So here's why. In the code that I copied over, some stuff is, let me show you. In a component we made, with our custom navigation bar. And our app bar action, we set accessibility label menu. So even though it's just an icon, if you just said icon menu, there would be no text, and voice control and screen reader functionality would not know what words and what voice to use for that item. But by saying accessibility label menu, it's labeled as menu. And now I can use voice control to save my wrist strain to interact with it. And someone who's not sighted can use a screen reader so that when they select that item, it says menu and they know that it's a menu click. So we're in good shape as far as accessibility is concerned when it comes to interacting with icons. And as this is one of the low-hanging fruit that's really highly recommended for any web application or mobile application, is to, I'm getting distracted because my video is a little bit weird, but it's recommended to have text equivalents for things to make sure that they show up that way. I don't know why my video is so weird. Let's try the lighting. Maybe I'm going insane. I don't know. So that's our accessibility. Let's go back and check if we have any dependency updates yet. Reload this page. It says it last checked 38 seconds ago. Oh, we got an error. I wonder what that is. Huh. I'm not sure what that means. But I do see 5 pull requests, so let's check into those. Maybe that's just saying that that ESLint update is failing. All right, so we have updates to React Native Web, React Native Safe Area Context, React Navigation Native Stack, ESLint, and React DOM, and React Native. And notice differences here. So they all have runs of our test and lint checks. This one passed, but this one actually failed. ESLint failed. Let's see why. Go into details, and we can see, oops, something went wrong. ESLint 8 failed to load plugin flow type declared in ESLint rc.js. So that's kind of a mysterious error. And when it comes to dependencies, there can be mysterious errors. So I looked into this before in my other project. And what I found is actually that ESLint 8 is not compatible with this older format. And so on my other project, there were some configurations I put in place as far as packages we don't want to update. So I'm going to copy all of those over. So Babel, Jest, and Jest I found were reasons. Here's packages that were locked to Expo and will be updated along with it. Let me make sure these packages are used. Yep, Expo status bar is used. React DOM, Native, Gesture Handler. React Native Gesture Handler, Reanimated, and Safe Area Context and Screens are all used as a part of React Navigation. And even React Native Web is locked to the Expo version as well. So we don't want to automatically update any of those. So I'm going to update those. That may actually close out all of our PRs that have opened. And we'll say lock dependencies updated as part of lock dependencies. There's a few different reasons we're locking dependencies. So now when I push this config up, I believe it's going to automatically update any pull requests we don't need or want anymore, ones that should be closed. Oh, ESLint I didn't lock, so let me see what happened over there in the other project. ESLint 7320. Huh. So we don't want to go from ESLint 7 to ESLint 8 yet, but it looks like on my other project I didn't actually put that in the dependency log file. So let's put that here, ESLint. And I don't want to not lock it from any updates. Let's say Dependabot config to look this up. And I want to say Dependabot, don't try to update ESLint to version 8. Ignore. Ignore all updates for versions 4 and 5. And let's just say versions 8.x. Once 9 comes around, probably I would start breaking it as well, but at least we have this covered. So let's say ignore ESLint 8 in Dependabot. And what's the other update that's still happening? React Navigation Native Stack. So that's a valid one we're actually going to test, so that's great. Let's push this up. Oh, I see Babel Core is being updated though. Sometimes with Dependabot, when you first push it up, if your project's not brand new, it's not going to update 100 dependencies at once. It's going to do a few at a time. And once you address the first one, another one will come in. So as I look at this, yeah, so I see that it has removed the ESLint update because it said, and if we actually look at the closed PR, it'll say, looks like ESLint is no longer being updated by Dependabot. That message is a bit general. It's actually this version is not being updated by Dependabot. So it closed it out for us, but let's look at the open PRs. So the first one is React Navigation native stack from 6.5.0 to 6.5.2. So we do want to be running the latest versions of everything, so we want to put that in there. This is very strange that my video is so dark. Let me try to switch it back. I'm going to mess something up with my video. I'll have to look into that afterwards. Okay, well, you can see me as a mysterious ghost in here. Is it because of this? Oh, there we go. It was because of the light coming in from outside. Cool. I'm going to close that in the future. Here I am. All right. So I want to look at these one at a time. React Navigation native stack. So when this dependency is updated, it updates from 6.5.0 to 6.5.2, and we can see our log file updates as well. And if we want to in here, we can look at the release notes. Provide proper context to header elements in native stack. Well, it seems like it might be related. Take screen count and dismiss from native side for native stack. That seems like stuff I might actually be useful. Maybe we could do something I'm doing differently. But so here's an interesting thing. Native stack is actually an interesting counterexample to what I was saying. So our JavaScript tests are still passing, but remember what we did with screen tests. With screen tests, we're not testing the navigation layer. And we're not testing the navigation layer because it's going through the native code. So we don't know if this native code update could break. Maybe they have a bug, maybe I've done something wrong in my code, but I can't actually be confident merging this dependency update until I try it out locally. So that's what we're going to do. For dependencies that do involve native code, I want to try them locally to manually test them before I put in the update. And really, it's just very basic testing locally to make sure the app launches. So I'm going to check out that branch. Actually, I'm going to fetch first and then check out that branch. I'm going to yarn install to install that package. Then I'm going to start up Expo and make sure that the app runs fine. In the meantime, I can check out the other pull request. Oh, well, there it goes. Yarn start. It's opening. And I do want to, because, React Navigation implements the website as well. So I want to run in iOS and on web. You'll notice I haven't actually launched Android this time, because I'm pretty sure Android is going to keep working as it has been working. Actually, let me close out of Expo entirely just to make sure. Run an iOS simulator. All right, our app launches. Let's make sure our stack, well, I guess we're not using the stack navigation at this point. We're using it in that we're calling the stack navigator to get the header. We're not drilling down to a lower level yet, but that's okay. That's just where we are. So all of our navigation is working fine on web, on iOS. Let's check on web as well. We're going to cheat and assume it's fine on Android. Whoa, what is going on with my video? Sorry about the lighting, folks. Let's see if this going off makes it better. No. I may need a better camera. Maybe this will be an audio-only screencast going forward. We'll see. We actually have to spend some money on my setup. Oh, and here, so our React navigation is working here as well. And why don't we just go ahead. I wouldn't always do this, but just for the heck of it, we'll try with the collapsing. Because I had seen issues with the collapsing and the expanding as versions of this had updated. So all our navigation is working great. And if I had a test to write like that, it can be tough to really get confidence on this. Like, am I sure, is the animation just right? Does the right-hand side look just good? So for something as complex as these navigations, it's kind of nice to do a manual test. And now I'm good to go. I don't need to test all the other functionality in my app, like the showing of the list or the tapping on it, because that's covered by my automated test in the JavaScript code. And then I manually tested the integration with the native code, and we're good to go. So I'm going to merge, and I'm confident that's working just fine. Oh, it's got the delete branch setting there. I'm going to change that setting in the GitHub repo to get it to automatically delete branches. What the heck is that called? Automatically delete head branches. I don't know what head means in that context. I'm not smart enough about Git. I just know what I need to know. Oh, and notice in the meantime, our other dependencies have passed. So Babel core, Babel you likely know is for transpiling JavaScript. And so if this update is passing, I can be pretty confident that the application works. So I'm going to merge that pull request. And that's just a tiny patch version as well. We can see now that the branch is deleted. Now we go back into here, testing library React Native. So this is just the testing code. And so assuming that the tests still pass when this happens, and maybe I'll just check I never usually think of this, but since I'm thinking about it on a stream, I'm going to check the details to make sure no warnings come out in unit tests. Yep, no warnings. We're all looking good and go. And so now we're good to merge the pull request. I'm going to say git checkout main locally, git pull. And now if we look in our history, we can see that these pull requests were merged down. I guess I could actually maybe change those to squash instead, but those have been merged in. Now we have all the latest. Now locally, I had not yet pulled down all the latest dependencies, so let me pull those down to make sure they match. I'm going to run the test here first. They pass. Now I'm going to run the server. I'm going to reload in the simulator. So this is with the latest React Native testing library, the latest Babel, and the latest React navigation drawer. And in web one more time to make sure web is running the latest as well to support our continuing development efforts. And it runs just fine. All right, so we're good. Now this is something very powerful to think about, and I want to take a minute to draw attention to this. I was able to close those pull requests for those updated dependencies very quickly. And now we know, because Dependabot is watching, and it's going to be watching daily, that we're running all the latest versions of the dependencies. There is a caveat in Expo that a number of these core dependencies are locked to Expo, and they'll be updated along with it when I run Expo update. But other than that, all the dependencies we pull in, including my personal ones and stuff like that, Axios and everything like that, they're all updated. And on my open source projects, they have dozens and scores, and some of them hundreds of PRs of dependency updates that have all had automated tests run to tell me that they're working great, and I can merge them down with total confidence. Or if it's something that does have a native dependency, I can say, okay, that one I'm going to pull down very briefly locally and just eyeball it, smoke test it to make sure it's looking good before I merge it down. But I'm able to stay on top of the latest versions of things very well in this regard. It gets me bug fixes. It gets me enhancements with new possibilities. Some of the things actually running in Firehose here with navigation are running more smoothly than they did in my previous app because the latest version has some bug fixes. And when you think about your professional projects, a lot of times folks have dependencies that fall way, way behind, and it's hard to schedule in time to work on those dependencies because it takes a lot of work. You got to think about which ones to update. But when you have thorough regression test coverage, you can update dependencies with confidence. So much so that if the tests pass and it's green on here, you can merge it down and you can be good to go for most of the time. And you do still have the test flight stage where it's going to your internal testing users in case anything slips through or anything at the native layer. Is very, very powerful, and I really recommend for all of your personal and hobby and professional projects to have thorough test coverage so that you can set automatic dependency updates to stay up to date so you don't fall into a situation where you're out of security compliance, where you have security issues or the possibility of security issues, and you're so far behind that you have to do major version updates with breaking changes in order to get security. Stay on top of those dependencies, and tests are a great way to help you get there. All right, we've made great progress. Let's see what's next. Next, we want to implement the next highest priority unread page feature, marking read. And with the foundations we've laid with our functionality and with our testing, I think we're going to be able to implement this fairly quickly and probably even get the test in today, although y'all know how overly ambitious I usually am. So we want to mark as read. So the way that I've implemented marking as read, there's a few commands that I want to do for each of my items. One of them is mark as read. One of them is delete, because oftentimes I save something, but then I say, oh no, I actually want to delete it instead. I don't want to read it after all. and edit. There's a way to edit, which in the previous implementation happened in line. We will probably navigate down to a child page in this setup. But yeah, so I want to have the ability to take multiple actions on each row. As I've mentioned before, I don't care a whole lot about material design standards. I care that React Native Paper gives me a lot of great abstractions out of the gate. And so I want to get something that works for me. Here's what I think I want to do. I think I want to add an interaction icon on the right-hand side of the list item. That can be a list icon. And when we tap on it, I want to get a menu to display. They can display drop down. So let's try that out and see if we can get that working. And I am going to write the implementation first before I write the test for it. All right, we've got a list icon. And if you're just joining the stream, we are building a link saving app. I always say link sharing, but it's a link saving app. It's a personal app. We've got our links in here. Our links are being loaded from a backend service that's already in place. And now we want the ability to mark them as read. All right. So when we have a list item, there is a write prop that lets you have the right hand side. So let's implement this. On our unread screen, our list item is still in line here. This might become a separate extracted out component at some point, so we'll see. We'll say write, and then what is going into the right hand side? It's a list icon. List.icon. You can specify the color, so let me avoid specifying the color and let's see what the default is. And then we have icons. Icon equals. And I think we're going to need to pop up to this level. Yeah, icons here. This lets us go to material community icons. So these are the icons we're using. So we could, ooh, this is going very slow in Safari. Menu down outline. Menu down looks good to me. Although I guess dots vertical, I feel like that's something that's used. Hamburger menu doesn't feel right for there. Dots horizontal, dots vertical. I think any of these would be fine. Menu down is what I had in my previous app, so let's just put that in. Menu down, and when I'm using Google Apps in the future, maybe I'll feel differently about it. I'll notice something. But let's just see if this icon appears for us on the right-hand side. We do have fast refresh, and so our app should reload automatically. Object is not a function near right. Okay, so is that supposed to be a function? We're going into list item, right, callback, which returns a React element. Okay, so this should be a function. All right, we've got this right-hand side drop down. I will say, honestly, looking at that doesn't feel material design. So let's go back to the icons and go with one of the others. Dots horizontal, dots vertical. Dots vertical feels like it's going to seem weird to me. I'm just going to look at YouTube real quick. I'm in YouTube all the time. So let's see if they have anything, any examples. They do have vertical dots. I thought I remembered that. They're maybe a little bit smaller, but that's okay. So let's stick as close as we can. There's also seen inset kind of a ways from the side, like it's weird that there's so much margin, but that's okay. I can look into those visuals later. The key is let's get it working. Next thing I want to see is if I tap on the icon, is it going to be the regular press of the item or not? It does, but I'll bet you if I make the right icon clickable, that might not happen anymore. So let's see. List item, list icon, props. Oh, passing in the props from left and right. So let's take a look at that. Props. Yeah, let's do that. Props. I don't know too much about this, but this makes sense. It seems like that changed the color. Let me see if it changes it to black. Yeah, check it out. When I don't pass the props, it's black and it's outdented a bit more. Whereas when I add the props, it's gray and it's closer to the side. I'm close to the point that it looks correct. So yeah, that looks intentional. All right, let's see about clicking on an icon. Well, list item. let's just say on press equals console log pressed icon. So let's see if that'll work for us. And that opened up the link. Let me, instead of having this navigation happen, I'm going to temporarily change this console.log pressed row. And let's see if this logs out over here for us. Pressed row. All right, so now we can easily see that that's happening. Well, let's try it. Let's try pressable. Not sure. There might be a more recommended React Native paper way, but let's just try this. Pressable, and I forget the pressable API, so let's pull it up. On press, and then it just says contents, like on press equals, let's pull this out. All right, we press the row, press the icon. It doesn't highlight currently, but that's okay. We're gonna have the menu show up. It's gonna be something, and we can always improve the visuals later. But now we are just pressing the icon, so that's really good. Oh, I did remember we do wanna have the accessibility properties for this icon, so let's just look that up. Actually, make it to do here. Test list icon label. It's not clear from the docs what the proper accessibility label is for it, although Pressable might have one. Let's try the Pressable, because actually that probably makes the most sense to interact with. Yeah. Maybe, yeah. Well, I'm going to keep that to do and come back to it, because I do care about accessibility. I want to make sure to get it in, but I want to come back to that in time and just do one thing at a time. So now we have the ability to press a row. Let's look at the difference here, and let's put the real implementation back here of open bookmark. So now clicking a row will open the bookmark, and clicking here will press the icon. Now let's get a menu appearing. See how the menu works in React Native Paper. Menu, visible on dismiss, anchor, and then that's the thing you click on, and then there's the contents of the menu. Cool, so let's pull in menu from React Native Paper. Nope. And so this menu actually goes around. You know what? No, but it says button on press. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So on the right, we're going to put the menu, because it all pops down from there. And this pressable is not inside the menu. It's in anchor. Let me save this just to get it to format. And we're going to say visible equals is menu shown. Is menu. Oh, this is, you know what? Check it out. Because we're going to want separate menu state. But actually, this could be good. We probably only want to show one menu at a time. So we could, let's look at this. So menu false on dismiss. So that's going to be there. And then in the menu, we'll just have a menu item before we get the real menu items. So we'll say menu shown. Okay. So I think what we want is not to have every menu item to have its own toggle state for a menu, but I want to say there's state at the screen that says menu shown index. And we're going to say null for when there's no menu shown. And we'll say visible if menu shown index equals, and how do we get under flat list? We need to get the index. Actually, instead of the index, I think using the ID works out great because then it's just less indirect. Menu shown ID. Menu shown ID equals item.id. Yeah, because item is available there. So this is visible if that's the case. Anchor. And then so on press is we do set menu shown ID item.id. So when you press on it, that's set. And then on dismiss is set menu shown ID item null. Probably extract these out in a second, but this will just help us test it. So I think what will happen is by default, the menu will not be shown. When we tap on the pressable, it'll set the ID to the ID of the item we're on. That'll show the menu. And then when we dismiss it by tapping out of it, it'll set the menu shown ID to null. So let's see if that happens. Check it out. Menu item shows. When we tap out, it goes away. Tap on this one, it shows. Yeah, tapping out. It looks like just even tapping out of it, it's going to dismiss it before we can click on another one anyways. So that's fine. But the point is we don't need to store a bunch of different toggle states. We just have the one menu shown ID out there. So that's really great. But let's add some helper functions out here so that there's less. I mean, our JSX is already getting pretty cluttered, so let's simplify it out. We'll say function is menu shown for ID. Well, let's do it this way. Is menu shown, and we'll just even do the item. So visible is menu shown item. Can't show menu for item. And we'll say const hide menu So that gives names to these concepts. So instead of using implementational details down here, we can say what's happening. So menu is visible if menu is shown for the item. On dismiss is hide menu. And on press, we say show menu for the item. And I think this should work just the same. And it does not. So what have we done? Oh, no, this should be an arrow function, so that is called, actually, this one doesn't need to be an arrow function. Just pass that function there, but we need to capture the item there to pass it along. And if those menus are all shown, then there's a bug. Yeah. Is menu shown? Oh, no. Yeah, that doesn't need to be a function. We'll get this right. Maybe I should be using TypeScript. Maybe that would be a good idea. But right now I'm not. Okay, so these menus are getting toggled. So I think this is a good commit. So let's add this commit. Add toggle menus to items. And this is complex enough that I probably will extract this out. But actually, if I can wait to get my tests in place, they will cover the functionality as I extract it out into separate components. So I'd rather write it in place here and extract it out afterwards. So we're going to add one menu item. And there's just going to be one for now. But there's going to be more in the future. But we already know we're going to need a menu. So we're going to say mark read. And we're going to say console.log marked as read. And just do one step at a time, just so we can get confidence that what's happening is what we expect was happening. So this refreshes, we pull it up, we tap mark read, and it says marked as read. So let's actually create a function for that. This one, yeah, mark read item. So one of the things we're going to do is after we mark it as read, we're going to hide the menu. So that's fine. Let's even show that. Oh yeah, we gotta link into it here as well. just get that UI functionality in before we make the method call and everything. Mark read. So that now goes away. It doesn't do anything yet, but it goes away. So now we can implement this. And what we need to do here is we need to do something else with bookmark client. And I'm just going to look it up. Because I forget the documentation of my library. Homepage. Create where related update ID and then attributes. Cool. Okay. So bookmark client dot update. Now I don't have my example code up to be able to see this, but let's just guess. ID item.id attributes, and we don't need to pass in all the attributes, just the attributes that are changing. I think it's, well, let me check and see what's coming in. I'll bet you in our network tab we'll be able to see those fields because I think it'll come through as a null. So bookmarks, go to the bottom. Red, false. Published at. Oh yeah, and then move to list at is implemented on that side. So I think we could probably say read true. So I think that's what we're doing. We're saying, hey, update that to be read true. And we want to make this asynchronous, so I can say await. So yeah, update the bookmark to make it read true, and then hide the menu. I think we're gonna to-do reload the links or something. That could maybe be next time. Maybe an implementation detail. Because we do want it to disappear from the list. But so let's check it out. Jest, mark read. So, I don't know. I didn't get any errors coming up, but let's reload the page and see if it disappears. And it does. So that's great. Let's do this on the web. Aren't you always so excited when I'm surprised that something works? Let's see, because in the web it's easy to see the requests and responses. Let's say React Native Testing Library, mark read. So here's the request. It went to API bookmarks 39 because that was the ID. And in the request body, it said bookmarks ID, set attributes read true. And then in the response, it said, cool, yeah, okay. Attributes read true. Interesting. Okay, that gives me an idea of what we could do on this screen, which will maybe be next time. But it seems like that's working. So we'll leave that to do in for now. But yeah, so we'll say, and let's make this as a pull request, because now that we have a test suite running, the test can run on the pull request to make sure it's working on the server as well. So we'll call this this branch mark read. Implement. And notice we haven't actually, well, locally we had that commit on main. So let's say implement marking read. I'm going to go back to main and pull back this commit because I want that to be on the branch. So now that we're on the branch, we have these two commits, adding the toggle menu, then implement marking read. So now let's write the test. Let's see, this could be actually very fast compared to what we've done before now that we have this foundation in place. Let's say it allows marking a link as read. Pretty sure we're going to need async here. So let's duplicate the code. We can always remove that later. So we wait for that to show up, and actually we'll wait for something else instead. But so what do we click now? What do we click in order to click on this item? Because it's just an icon with dots vertical. So this is something where React Native Testing Library can come in handy. And in the API for the queries, we can see get by accessibility, hint by accessibility value. So let's see which of these is. No, that doesn't seem right. By text. By label text. Returns a React test instance with matching accessibility label prop. Cool. So in this case, in this test, we want to say get by label text. And we want to wait until the label text is present that says, I guess if these are all the same label text, that could be unfortunate. There is that numbering approach to handle it. But to give it some kind of text to specify it on, we'll say actions. Action seems good. And this is one of the things that Kent C. Dodds has really advocated, and the other testing library have followed suit to say, and probably there's text in here that says, guiding principles. Yeah, try to use, the more your tests resemble the way your software is used, the more confidence they can give you. And one of those things is using accessible text or accessibility things to look things up. So that ensures, this is a way for the test to actually ensure, this test has actually drawn our attention to the fact that there was an accessible label for that and got me past my procrastination on it. So now I expect this is going to fail because there should not be any accessible label text like actions. I'm going to call .only, and here I'm going to say to do implement clicking, well, let's do it. Implement clicking mark red. So let's save this. Even just, I think I know how I'd write that section, but even just removing it to make sure we get our test to green one step at a time before we add more is nice. So one failed. No instance is found with accessibility label actions. So this is really interesting. Even though I don't have the app running in a context where I can easily use the accessibility stuff, if React Native testing library has label text return true, I can have some degree of confidence that probably it's accessible. So let's try this here. Let's say, maybe this happened over here. Draw item accessibility label. And we'll call that actions. So let's see if this prop actually causes our test to pass. Cannot destructure a property config of options as it is undefined with material community icons. So this is actually an error with the fact that we're using the icons. And I ran into this in my other project. One of the benefits of building multiple projects in the same stack is you start to recognize these things. And so now I just need to look over there and see how I got past it. So the icons. Actually, I might have ignored that one. Let's see. Try installing React Native vector icons. Yeah, honestly, I might have just ignored that. Yeah, so I might have too much pain on the stream and I might need to kind of work around this error to find a real solution. But for now, I think the test is working. It's saying no instances found with accessibility label actions. Okay, so let's try it on pressable. Let's see if we can get an accessibility label on there. And it works. So let me actually make sure the test still fails if I change that back to accessibility label foof. Just type in nonsense there. It fails. And now if I put actions back, it seems like it works. It seems like it's actually interactable. But I'll keep this to do to test the accessibility label for real. Unfortunately here now in this test I need to scroll down to see what's working, but it's okay. Could be worse. All right, so far we're getting to this point, and we want to say fire event press on actions. So we wait for it to come in, and then we press on it. And then we want to fire event press, and I'm not sure if see if I need to wait here. I'm not sure if I need to wait or not, but we'll say mark red to confirm request made to server. So let's see. Looks like you forgot to wrap your root component with provider with React Native paper. All right, well, we'll come back to that warning as well. Maybe that's also not needed. But let's see here. No instance found with accessibility label mark red. Oh, and I did get by label text. So I think get by text is what I want to check here because it's actually displayed text, and so I'd like to find that. We'll check it afterwards to make sure that it shows up for accessibility for a screen reader. Clicked actions, we click mark red. It says unable to find an element with the text mark red. So that's interesting. You'd think it would be able to find that. Let's try accessibility label. I don't mind looking it up by that. That's a good thing to look up by anyways. And if that doesn't work. So in general, one of the downsides of using a library like this, you get a lot for free visually, but it can be not quite so clear how to test things when you're not sure what's happening under the hood. No instance is found with accessibility label mark red. Oh, you know what? I bet you it's the wait. I'll bet you I'm not waiting for it. So let's say wait for get by text mark red. This is another one of the downsides of React Native testing library is because this asynchrony is exposed in here, whereas Detox and Cypress, and I don't know about Appium, but Detox and Cypress handle asynchrony and waiting for things automatically for you. But in React Native testing library, you need to put that in yourself. So that exposes some implementation details in the test, and so it's not quite as nice. There's definitely a trade-off there. So we're going through a lot of warnings here. I'm able to find an element with text marked red, but let's now try get by label text. There's a lot of different things to try. This is found with accessibility label marked red. So that's just interesting. So let's look for this. We may get stuck on this. There's marked red. Menu item. Let's look at menu item in here. Icon unpress. Title. Title text for menu item. Put in a test ID. So there is test ID. There is accessibility label. Accessibility label for the touchable. Menu item. Accessibility label marked red. So now I don't know. Is it the timing issue? Or is it the fact that it's not being found? So I think I'm going to try something. So there's something called test ID that you can use something for test purposes. Let's use it temporarily. In the past, I've used these a lot, but it is good to avoid it when you use something else. Mark red menu item. And we'll try this. Get by test ID. I think it's lowercase on this end. I'm not sure. Get by test ID, mark red menu item. We'll see. It'll blow up if it's not a real function. Mark menu red item. So I don't think this is an aspect of anything in there. I think that would be found. I could put just a plain button in there to test it out, but I think it's not actually animating to show that menu item. So this is kind of challenging. We want to test to make sure that shows, and I think we're waiting for it. Tap on it, show menu. Maybe something I'll do is to log it out to make sure. So I'm going to log console.log menu shown ID, and this will just cause whenever a re-render happens, that ID will be outputted. So let's just make sure it re-renders and shows it. Sometimes you can't be totally confident. Yeah, menu shown ID 1. So that's happening. Menu is being shown. I think. Menu item. Mark red test ID. So I think it's being shown. Maybe it's not being animated. Oh yeah. Okay, so this is tough. This is showing some of the challenges with React Native testing library. Let me see if this error is in here. Does icon. You called act without a wait. Suspicious. Portal consumer. Is it the animated thing? I forgot to wrap it with React Native paper. You know, that could be a problem. The fact that that's not being done could be actually causing a problem here. So let's try it, and we'll see if we can get this test to pass before the end of our time together. I will not argue that it's easy to do testing in React Native. It can be challenging. Let's do paper provider, and we don't need the config that happens at the app level. But let's see if that, maybe the fact that we have a menu now needs a paper provider to do the animating and stuff like that. And sure enough, it did. So getting rid of these warnings when you can be a good idea to prevent other problems from happening. So we're able to get this item by test ID. Now let me just, we need to make small steps towards going back to where we want it to be. Let me first make sure this means this is actually showing up. So if I don't press actions, mark red menu items should not appear unless there's some visibility issue. So let's see. Yeah, it says unable to find element. Great. So that confirms that this clicking actions is really causing this thing to be shown. We can probably remove this console log right now. Yeah, we'll need to come back to that, but also maybe our tests might handle it automatically. So just a few more minutes here getting this test finished. So we don't ideally want to use a test ID. I'm going to label this as working to make sure I don't lose track of it. But let's instead check and try to look for the text mark red and see if that passes. Now, why? Because we had the provider. It does. If we turn off actions, will it stop working? It does. So now we don't need this, and we don't need the label text. Let's make sure this works. It does. Remove that. And we will, remove this test ID for sure. We'll remove the accessibility label for the moment as well. Because ideally, I think in code and in React Native, the title should show up for accessibility, but I don't know for sure. So we're going to start here, and I have the to-do to myself to test the accessibility later. So we're successfully clicking mark red. So now I want to check that the call goes to the server successfully. So I want to say expect, and remember what we set up here. Let me copy this. HTTP, and this is a get. This is a patch. So expect HTTP patch to have been called with, and we'll just say foof again. I expect this to fail because HTTP patch isn't even defined, and that's definitely not what it's called by. But let's just find out because we want to confirm that the right request goes to the server. Must be a mock or a spy. So what we're going to do is to go into test utils, and we're going to say patch is a jest function that can be mocked as well. Again, these console errors really clutter things up. Expected calls foof, but number of calls 0. Number of calls 0, that's kind of surprising. I wonder if it's because it's immediate, but calling on show menu should call bookmark client update. So let's try this. Let's try timing. Console log 1, console log 2, and let's see if the 1 or the 2 is reached in time. I don't see either of them outputted. We're clicking mark red. Mark red is that. Mark red is that. Let me hide this and just see if that console log is outputted at that point. Because sometimes when there's too much output, it can make things more tedious. Am I clicking it? Oh, I'm not clicking it. I'm just waiting for it. And I think you do need both. I think you need to wait for it, and I think you need to click on it. So this should be better. One is outputted. Very nice. uncomment this. We probably don't need the 1 and the 2. All right, so expected foof, which is not what we really expected, but we wanted the test to tell us what happened. And then here's what it's called with. And so what we want to do, as before, is to copy these values over, but to think about them. And we're not just capturing what is already happening and assuming it's right. We want to think about it to make sure. So call patch with bookmarks 1, and 1 is the name, is the number of the bookmarks ID, so that looks right. And then now here, what is the data that's passed in? I'm going to save this to do verify these values. I'm going to save this just to get auto format to come in, so it's not a block of red staring at me. And well, I can see if this passes. It does pass, but I need to format this differently because I'm really going to need to be able to visualize it. So data, attributes, ID, type, and the order of these things doesn't matter, but I want to put it this way just so I can visualize it. And then headers, this is the JSON API data type. So this is saying, yeah, we're passing in the data, bookmark type 1, attributes red, true, that's what we want to see. And this header we don't care too much about, but that's the JSON API data type. We can probably remove some duplication there. But yeah, so this is working. And so now I want to see the test fail if I remove that. So let me remove that. It fails, so let's put it back. And now looking at the code, I notice there's one other thing that happens. When I click mark red, it should hide the menu that was shown. So that would be good to test for as well. So after we press mark red, we want to expect this to have been called. And then, oh, waiting for something to be hidden is challenging. So let me make a to-do there. To-do, test that mark red is hidden. So I'll look into that next time, because I am 7 minutes over, so I want to stop here and just let my whole test suite run to make sure that it's passing. It's all passing. So I'm going to add this. I'm going to leave that to do in for now. I think it's okay. But we're going to say test marking red. And I want to go ahead and push this up and open a PR because I want to show you all the PR process. Y'all have probably done PRs on GitHub before. Mark red, usually on team projects I'd add a lot more detail, but for my personal project this is enough. But when I open this, look, I've got my commits that are involved, my tests are running, including my new test that I've changed. My series of commits shows up here, but I can look at the overall files changed to see, cool, okay, I got menu showing functionality added into here. And we got our testing marking a link as red, that test is added in. And then we've got our expansion to the API here on mock HTTP. In fact, while this is running, I'm just going to write a note to myself in here for next time. Update test to confirm that that menu is hidden. What else do I want to do? I want to refactor component to extract. What does it say? To extract child components to make the code easier to follow. And then I do want to remove item from list after marked red. So I want some way for it to disappear so it doesn't show up. And in that case, like TDD, since I don't know how I'll implement it. Well, so I might actually write the test first and then see what will implement it. Oh, and we also have A1Y checking, accessibility checking. Cool. So our checks have passed, and we can be confident that these changes haven't broken anything. So we can merge the pull request. And now I have the ability to mark my links as red. Still fairly rudimentary, but it is something. Once the items actually disappear from the list, that'll seem a little bit more realistic, but this is how far we've gotten so far today. So let's review and look at what we did. Let me see it working on the web as well. JSON API client, mark red, reload the page, and we're good. That's removed from there. So what did we do today? We added testing for our existing unread page functionality to add items to the list. We talked about why to prefer component state over a React context. We set up Dependabot. That's going to be running every day this week until our next stream to confirm things are still good. We checked accessibility, and we implemented the first part of marking red. Just now, there was something I was just thinking about that I wanted to add in. What was it? Getting test, refactor. I don't remember what it was. So this is what we're going to do next time. We're going to get implementing better marking red in progress. I'm going to go ahead and do a build to myself after the stream so I can use this updated version of the app. But thank you so much for joining in. For those of you who are in the chat asking questions, those of you checking the recording afterwards, join back next time where we continue on. We're going to, that's what it was. I want to fix warnings in the test output because that was really cluttering it up. And when there's all those expected warnings, it's hard to see new warnings that come in. It just makes it harder and harder to work within your tests. So I'm going to spend some time this week to try to figure out those warnings because it's hard stuff. I don't want us just to be stuck on the stream about it, but hopefully I'll have something to share to actually clean that up in the next run. But that's it for today. I thank you all so much for joining in. It's been great. Next week, a week from today, we'll jump back in. What day is that? I don't know what day that is. Y'all in the recording don't care. April 1st, not April Fools, as they say. We'll be back together, 4 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for joining. Thanks for watching the recording afterwards, and check us out next time for more building for web and mobile with Expo. See ya.